All right, KMR. I get a lot of motors that come in through the shop, random stuff. I figure I'm going to start talking more about what comes in and not just about what's going out. Obviously, this is not a motor I built or I ported, but it came in, and it came in for many reasons. It blew an apex seal, so we've damaged an apex seal, detonation, and they wanted to fix it up, make it a better motor, knowing that they had cut some corners in the initial build. It was a very budgeted build, so we're not here to necessarily talk bad about the build, but we're going to talk about what we can address, what I'm going to improve, what maybe I wouldn't have done, and how we will go about improving this particular motor for its customer. So starting with some of the damage, it did have detonation. They believe they had fuel slosh. This is a Turbo 2 block being ran in a Turbo 2 car. So first generation Turbo 2, 86 to 88. And that's also in the casting. It's the small casting, because in your second generation Turbo 2 block, you had a little bit larger casting lands for the dowel pins. But also, yeah, Series 4 rotors as well. So basically a Series 4 car, Series 4 block in a various range of components. So they did have detonation. They do believe they know why. Blew the tips off the apex seals. Those tips then came around and damaged the rotor housings and the rotor. So right off the bat, we've got to replace a rotor, and it most likely replace a rotor housing, although we may be able to salvage that. The block itself was a very aggressive street port with a Holy bridge. This is basically a technique of doing a bridge without really being a bridge. This was done to get around rules in racing at different points of racing past, and also a way for budget builds to get some bridge effect without going to the full effort of bridge porting the actual motor entirely. Obviously, we're going to change this into a proper bridge, and this street port, although it's extremely big, is also extremely shallow, meaning they didn't cut very much material away, so it's really just laid over the top here. You can usually get your finger in these water jackets and see how much material is there, and you'll want to check all your ports so you don't accidentally make one port bigger than the others. But in this case, we're going to be able to fix this and turn it into an actual bridge, and we're going to clean up this massive street port and make it a more functional massive street port, because obviously the customer's intent was to have something aggressive, so we're just going to finish that off for them. These housings are first generation Series 4 Turbo 2. They've never been lapped. I can tell these things because it's a small land right here, meaning later generations had more material, it's stronger. And then also, not the scratching marks, but if you look right here, you've actually got some diagonal machining marks, and that's factory machining. You see enough of these, you can tell pretty quickly. Although it's been ran, it's got some polishing, it's got some seal wear. Generally, these housings look pretty good. We may run them on the lapping table just for a minute to make sure we've got good water seal area, but we're going to talk to the customer about that, see what he wants to do. It's unsure if lapping is 100% necessary on this build yet, but this type of corrosion usually indicates that we may want to do some lapping to clean up the water seals. Now, a lot of the times in aftermarket builds, performance builds, people want to plug this rear water outlet. I wouldn't recommend welding it. This one's a little unsightly, and it's often hard to weld to this particular Mazda cast iron. It can lead to leaks, cracking, things like that. Generally, we'll do a plug. Pipe plugs are pretty normal, but when you're doing a pipe plug, this is soft cast iron. You have to be careful to not over torque your pipe plug, because you can also crack the block. So in some cases, actually machining this face flat and then doing a straight thread with a crush washer or stato seal can actually be a really nice way to seal this, what would be a pressed in plug or pressed in pipe, to seal it up and allow yourself to screw into it later on if you needed that water source for some reason. Same thing back here. This particular one is just plugged with a little rubber hose plug. We'll go ahead and actually remove the metal fitting and then face it and straight thread it so we can run a proper plug with a crush washer or seal, so we don't get any leaks. Pretty normal stuff for race motors. So addressing some of the issues, we'll probably also grind this down, clean it up, replug it. The gears themselves are stock to the motor. They are hardened Turbo 2 gears, but they're not multi-window. Being that this is a bridge port, obviously that's the idea, is high RPM. These are not high RPM stationary gears, so I'm going to recommend that the customer upgrades to multi-window bearings and gears. They're a little pricey, but they're going to allow you to get the RPM range with proper oil delivery for what this Bridgeport turbo motor is going to want to see. Since we have to replace a rotor, and these rotors aren't turbo rotors anyways, these are just NA Series 4 rotors, which is pretty common. Customers run an ethanol. It's a flex car, so he can handle the compression. I run these same rotors, but they're bone stock. They broke seals. I would probably recommend, since we've got to replace at minimum one, we'll actually side cut and narrow the rotors, rebalance, rematch, and these were running stock bearings, and same thing, being that it's a Bridgeport, I'd probably recommend them upgrading to a race bearing so they can handle a better RPM range. Just some basic stuff. So new seals, new bearings, replace a rotor, new stationary gears, and a lot of cleanup on the side so far. Was running a lightweight flywheel, decent water pump. Turbo 2 oil pumps are pretty straightforward. You could port the galleries a little bit to increase flow, but generally oil delivery isn't the issue on Turbo 2 blocks. In regards to the rotor housings, we got a little bit of a mismatch going on. I can tell right away we've got a turbo sleeve, Turbo 2 housing, and then we've got a 6-port sleeve that's been cut down and 6-port housing because it doesn't have the water gallery right there. Not a big deal. Again, it's a race car. It's a toy, so the fact that they don't exactly match is not a massive issue. It doesn't look like they've ever been ported, so that's kind of funny that they're running a massive Bridgeport on the secondary intake side and then stock rotor housings. So we will come through. I can actually pull the sleeve out of this one if we don't replace these housings, match up sleeves. We could run some titanium turbo sleeves. And then, although these have a lot of wear, we could send these out for honing. I'd recommend new housings. So that's how you take apart a motor that has potentially minor damage and turn it into a $6,000 engine project right away by needing all new seals, different stationary gears, replacing a rotor, potential rotor housings, and a lot of work to your side plates to make them function a little bit better. Now, again, I'm not here to be judgmental of this build. It served a purpose for the customer. He asked to go through it and clean it up, so that's what we're going to do. This was a running motor, and the reason it died was not because of this porting, was not because of those rotor housings. It was because of, as far as we are understanding, fuel slosh, which is pretty common in Turbo 2 Mazda RX-7s. Anytime you're below half a tank, if you do a hard turn on throttle, you could be subject to fuel slosh, which could harm fuel delivery. And if you don't get fuel delivery and you don't have protection built into the ECU you're running, or it is not tuned into the aftermarket ECU, then you will most likely detonate. And these seals also, I'm not sure which brand they were, but they broke, so they're probably not an unbreakable one. I prefer the E&Js because they don't break the tips, they just bend the tips. This motor wouldn't have seen nearly the damage it saw. In fact, this customer, had he been running a softer seal or harder seal, whatever you want to call it, a non-breakable seal, pick your favorite one, probably would have saved a couple $1,000s. Maybe still need a rebuild, but could have saved some coin. So if you like this talk in regards to what I see at Mazda Tricks and at KMR, again, this is a normal thing. We see a lot of blocks like this come in. We can talk about more of what we see, what we take apart, and then how we address it when customers want to make that step to a nice upgraded performance block. We'll also try to do a little follow-up on this as it's all cleaned up and ready to go back together so you can see how it cleaned up. So that's a Brap. That's a wrap. Thanks for watching KMR. I got a bunch of footage from the shop I got to edit together, but this was nice because I was able to do it in basically one take. I hope everybody enjoyed. Any questions, let me know. KMR, Mazda Tricks, Rotary. That's what we're talking about.